I stood at the edge of the funeral parlor, gripping my husband Mitchell's final letter in my trembling hands. His family sneered as I entered. The room was suffocating, black suits, white lilies, and whispers that fell silent when I passed, only to erupt again like hissing snakes. Everyone turned as Mitchell's brother delivered the eulogy, all solemn nods and practiced grief. But I stood in the corner, unwelcome and ignored, my fingers wrapped tightly around an envelope I'd found in our safe the night before. The letter contained truths Mitchell had never spoken aloud, confessions and instructions I'd only discovered after his heart gave out. I imagined reading it to the room, watching their smug expressions crack like porcelain. But that moment seemed impossible as his mother blocked my approach to the podium. I hadn't been invited to speak. I just saw the program pressed into my hands by the funeral director. My name wasn't there. And yet, I didn't cry. I smiled as I always do, softly, politely, invisibly, and took my seat in the back row. I clapped when everyone clapped. I accepted condolences from strangers who didn't know I existed 2 weeks ago. I was the widow, Mitchell's wife of 8 months, and no one believed I belonged in his story. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But the whispers didn't end there. As the service concluded and we prepared to move to the reading of the will, I heard Mitchell's sister Audrey's cutting voice. "Gold digger probably thinks she's getting something." They laughed. A small circle of family who had known Mitchell for his 46 years, but had never truly known him at all. They didn't know about our quiet ceremonies, our late-night dreams, our promises. They only saw what they wanted. A 32-year-old nobody who had somehow trapped their golden son. Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories of resilience and justice. Before the funeral, before the will reading, and long before I was handed a program that didn't include my name, I had a life that felt substantial but incomplete. My name is Catherine Mercer, now Catherine Walsh, and until 8 months ago, my world revolved around being unseen. I managed the administrative office at Westlake Medical Center, the kind of job where success means no one notices you're doing it. I processed paperwork, scheduled surgeries, and kept the department running while doctors received the praise and recognition. I met Mitchell Walsh on an ordinary Tuesday. He was the new chief financial officer, brought in to turn around the hospital's struggling finances. He wore tailored suits and carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who never had to question their place in the world. I was assigned to help him navigate the hospital's labyrinthine systems during his first week. I expected arrogance. What I found instead was kindness. "You've created an incredible filing system," he said on our third day, studying my color-coded organizational method that had saved the hospital thousands in billing errors. "Why hasn't anyone promoted you?" I remember laughing, the sound rusty and uncertain. "I'm not really the type people notice for promotion." He looked at me then, really looked, with those clear blue eyes that seemed to see straight through pretense. Then they're not paying attention. Mitchell wasn't like the other executives. He remembered the names of janitors and cafeteria workers. He asked questions and actually listened to the answers. When the board wanted to cut staff to save costs, Mitchell presented alternative solutions that preserved jobs while improving efficiency. He became beloved by the hospital staff within months. Our professional relationship slowly evolved into friendship. Coffee in the cafeteria became lunch outside the hospital, which eventually turned into dinner at quiet restaurants where we could talk for hours. Mitchell was 14 years my senior, but the age gap felt irrelevant. We connected on a deeper level than I'd experienced before. "You understand systems, human and organizational," he told me once. "You see patterns others miss." I had never thought of my attention to detail as anything special. Years of being overlooked had taught me to diminish my own value. Mitchell helped me see myself differently. 6 months after he arrived at the hospital, Mitchell asked me to dinner at an upscale restaurant overlooking the harbor. He seemed nervous, something I'd never witnessed in him before. "I've been offered a position in San Francisco," he said, his fingers tapping an uneven rhythm on the white tablecloth. "Triple the salary, corner office, company car." My heart sank. I forced a smile, the kind I'd perfected over years of hiding disappointment. "That's wonderful, Mitchell. You deserve it." I turned it down. I blinked, confused. "Why would you do that?" He reached across the table and took my hand. "Because the thought of not seeing you every day was unacceptable." That night, Mitchell told me about his life, the wealthy family in Connecticut, the private schools, the expectations. He described the carefully selected girlfriends his mother arranged introductions to, the society weddings he attended where he was consistently paraded as one of Boston's most eligible bachelors. "I've spent 45 years being who everyone expected me to be," he said. "With you, for the first time, I feel like myself." Mitchell proposed 3 months later, not with a flashy diamond, but with his grandmother's sapphire ring. "She was the only one who ever told me to follow my heart," he explained as he slipped it onto my finger. "She would have loved you." We married quietly at the courthouse, with only my best friend Lauren and Mitchell's college roommate Thomas as witnesses. Mitchell had wanted to invite his family, but each attempt at introducing me had been met with thinly veiled disapproval. His mother, Eleanor Walsh, from one of Boston's oldest families, had taken one look at my department store dress and community college education and dismissed me entirely. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "They'll come around," Mitchell assured me, though the tightness around his eyes suggested he didn't believe it. "Once they get to know you." But they never tried to know me. The few family events we attended together were exercises in polite exclusion. Conversations would switch to childhood memories or family acquaintances whenever I approached. Eleonora referred to me as Mitchell's friend, despite our marriage certificate. His brother Richard openly asked when Mitchell would come to his senses, as though our marriage were a temporary lapse in judgment. Still, with Mitchell, I felt secure. He never wavered in his support, never let his family's disapproval affect how he treated me. We built our life in a renovated townhouse in Cambridge, far enough from his family's Beacon Hill mansion to breathe freely, but close enough for obligatory Sunday dinners that Mitchell increasingly found reasons to miss. "You're my family now," he would say, holding me close on our small balcony as we watched the sunset. "The one I chose. The one who sees me." I didn't know then how little time we would have together. I didn't know that 8 months of marriage would be all we were granted. I didn't know that the persistent headaches Mitchell attributed to work stress were actually symptoms of an aneurysm that would rupture on a quiet Thursday evening as we discussed vacation plans for the summer. One moment he was laughing, teasing me about my obsessive itinerary making, and the next he was clutching his head, his face contorted in pain. I called 911, held his hand in the ambulance, pleaded with him to stay with me in the emergency room. But by midnight, Mitchell Walsh was gone, and I was a widow at 32. I called his mother. It was the hardest phone call I've ever made, listening to her composure crack as I delivered the news. Through her sobs, she managed to say, "We'll handle the arrangements. The family will take care of everything." At first, I was grateful. Numb with grief, the thought of planning a funeral seemed impossible. But within hours, it became clear that "the family will take care of everything" meant "we'll erase you" from the narrative. Richard arrived at our home the following morning. He didn't offer condolences. He didn't ask how I was coping. Instead, he handed me a document. This grants us access to Mitchell's accounts and property to arrange for his funeral and settle his affairs, he explained, extending a pen. Standard procedure. Something in his tone set off warning bells. I had worked in hospital administration long enough to recognize when someone was trying to push through paperwork without proper review. "I'll have my lawyer look at it," I said, setting the document aside without signing. Richard's jaw tightened. "This isn't necessary, Catherine. We're family. We just want what's best for Mitchell." "So do I," I replied. "That's why I'll have it reviewed properly." He left with barely concealed anger, and within hours, I received a call from Eleonora. Mitchell would want a traditional Walsh family funeral, she said without preamble, at St. Mark's, where his father and grandfather were memorialized. "The family plot is prepared." I swallowed hard. "Mitchell wasn't religious, Eleonora. He told me many times he wanted something simple, a celebration of life, not a church service." "You knew him for a year," she snapped. "I carried him for 9 months and raised him for 46 years. I think I know what my son would want." The battle lines were drawn. For the next 3 days, I fielded calls and texts from various Walsh family members, each more insistent than the last. Mitchell's aunt suggested I was too overcome with grief to make proper decisions. His cousin, an attorney, hinted that challenging the family's wishes would only lead to unnecessary complications regarding the estate. But I held firm. Mitchell had been clear about his wishes, though we'd never formally documented them. He wanted simplicity, authenticity, a service that celebrated his life rather than followed rigid traditions. I owed him that much. Then, on the 4th day after his death, I received an email from the family's lawyer containing the finalized funeral arrangements. St. Mark's Episcopal Church, full traditional service, family eulogy to be delivered by Richard Walsh, reception at the EEI, Walsh Family Home on Beacon Hill. At the bottom was a note. "The family has arranged for a car to collect you at 9:45 a.m. Professional attire is expected." There was no mention of my input, no acknowledgement of my place as Mitchell's wife and next of kin. I had been relegated to the role of guest at my own husband's funeral. I called the lawyer's office immediately. His secretary informed me that Mr. Harrington was unavailable but would return my call. He never did. That evening, desperate for some connection to Mitchell, I went to his home office. We had maintained separate workspaces, Mitchell in the EADI. Converted sunroom overlooking our small garden, me in the second bedroom upstairs. His desk was immaculate as always, each item in its precise place. I ran my fingers over his leather blotter, straightened a pen that didn't need straightening, breathed in the lingering scent of his sandalwood cologne. On impulse, I opened the small safe hidden behind the abstract painting I had given him for Christmas. Inside were our marriage certificate, his passport, a small velvet box containing his grandmother's cufflinks, and an envelope with my name written in his precise handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it. The letter inside was dated just 3 weeks earlier. "My darling Catherine, if you're reading this, something has happened to me, and for that, I am so deeply sorry. The thought of leaving you alone breaks my heart, especially knowing how my family will likely behave. They have never understood what truly matters in life, despite all their advantages. There are things I need to tell you. I've made arrangements with Thomas Harrison at Harrison and Reed Law to ensure you are protected. The family trust has certain provisions that Richard and Mother will try to use against you, but Thomas has all the documentation needed to counter them. Call him immediately if I'm gone. Everything I have is yours, Catherine. The house, the accounts, my share of the family, business. I've restructured my will to make this absolutely clear, though I know they'll fight you on it. Stand your ground. You are stronger than all of them combined. Remember what I told you the night we met? Some people build their lives on foundations of sand, appearances, status, others' expectations. You taught me to build on stone. Truth, compassion, authenticity. Never let them make you doubt your worth. All my love, now and always. Mitchell. I read the letter 3 times, tears blurring the words. It was so perfectly Mitchell, practical yet deeply loving, anticipating problems and providing solutions. Even from beyond death, he was trying to protect me. I called Thomas Harrison the next morning. His secretary put me through immediately. "Catherine," he said, his voice gentle with genuine compassion. "I've been waiting for your call. I'm so sorry about Mitchell." "You knew?" I asked. "About his concerns regarding the family?" Mitchell was very clear about the potential for complications. He made certain arrangements to prevent any issues. I was planning to contact you after the funeral, but I'm glad you reached out sooner. "His family is taking over everything," I explained. "The funeral is tomorrow, and they've excluded me from all decisions. The program doesn't even list me as his wife." Thomas's sigh carried years of experience with family disputes. "Unfortunately, that's not surprising. The Walshes are traditional, and they never approved of Mitchell's independence." "What should I do?" "Attend the funeral," he advised. "Maintain your dignity. Don't create a scene. That's exactly what they'll expect and use against you later. I'll be there as well. After the service, there's a will reading scheduled at the family home. That's when things will change." I wasn't sure what he meant, but his confidence gave me hope. That night, I selected a simple black dress, modest, appropriate, but not the frumpy sack Eleanor had probably expected me to wear. I would face the Walsh family with the same quiet strength Mitchell had always seen in me, even when I couldn't see it myself. The car arrived precisely at 9:45. The driver was polite but distant, clearly instructed to treat me as a regular passenger rather than the grieving widow. As we approached St. Mark's, I could see the gathering crowd, Boston's elite coming to pay respects to one of their own. Black-clad figures clustered on the church steps, exchanging muted greetings and somber handshakes. My stomach tightened. Somewhere in that sea of old money and older prejudices, I would need to find an anchor. I spotted Lauren waiting on the Adi periphery, her familiar face a lifeline in the approaching storm. Mitchell had liked her instantly. "Another truth-teller," he'd called her. "You don't have to do this alone," she whispered as she embraced me. "I'll be right beside you." "Actually," came a clipped voice behind us, "family is seated in the first 3 rows. Friends should find seats toward the back." Eleanor Walsh stood there, immaculate in designer black, her face a mask of controlled grief. A pearl necklace worth more than my car adorned her neck, and her silver hair was perfectly coiffed beneath a small fascinator. "I'm Mitchell's wife," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "I believe that qualifies as family." Something flickered across her face, annoyance, perhaps, or surprise that I would challenge her publicly. "The arrangements have already been made. The immediate family will process in together." "And I'm not included in that procession, I assume?" "It's tradition," she replied coolly. "Walsh family members and their spouses of significant standing." The qualification hung in the air between us. 8 months of marriage didn't qualify as significant in her estimation. My community college education and middle-class background didn't merit inclusion in the hallowed Walsh procession. Lauren squeezed my hand. "We should find our seats, Kat. This isn't the time." She was right. Making a scene outside the church would only reinforce the family's narrative about me. Opportunistic, classless, inappropriate. I nodded and followed her into the church, feeling the weight of judging eyes as we passed. The program handed to me by the usher was expensively printed on heavy cardstock. Mitchell's full name, Mitchell Edward Walsh III, was embossed in gold at the top, followed by his birth and death dates. Below that was a quote from Tennyson that Mitchell would have hated. He preferred Vonnegut to Victorian sentimentality. The list of speakers included Richard Walsh, brother, James Harrington, family attorney, William Thorne, business partner, and Reverend Phillips. My name appeared nowhere. I had been erased from the narrative of my husband's life. In their version of Mitchell, I was a footnote at best, a mistake at worst. The real Mitchell, the man who brought me coffee in bed every Sunday morning, who left sticky notes with terrible jokes on the bathroom mirror, who believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself, was nowhere in this sanitized, aristocratic memorial. The church filled quickly. Lauren and I found seats in the 5th row, behind what was clearly designated as family seating. I recognized faces from the few Walsh gatherings I'd attended: cousins, business associates, friends from Mitchell's, prep school and Harvard days. No one acknowledged me. A few cast curious glances, perhaps wondering who the young woman in the 5th row might be, not realizing they were looking at the widow. The organist began playing as the family processed in. Richard led the way, escorting Eleonora, whose grief appeared precisely calibrated, visible enough to be appropriate, but controlled enough to maintain dignity. Various aunts, uncles, and cousins followed, all wearing the same expression of restrained sorrow, as though excessive emotion would be vulgarly middle class. The service itself was everything Mitchell would have detested: formal, cold, focused more on the Walsh legacy than on Mitchell himself. The Reverend spoke of returning to God's embrace, despite Mitchell's well-established agnosticism. Richard's eulogy painted a portrait of a brother I barely recognized: the dutiful son, the brilliant financial mind, the upholder of family traditions. There was no mention of his compassion for the hospital staff, his dry sense of humor, his love of science fiction novels, or his habit of sneaking potato chips in bed while reading. And there was certainly no mention of me. William Thorne's remarks at least touched on Mitchell's professional integrity and innovation, qualities I knew were genuine. But even he referred to Mitchell as a confirmed bachelor until recently, reducing our marriage to an afterthought. Throughout it all, I sat still, back straight, eyes forward. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. Mitchell had believed in my strength. Today, I would live up to that belief. As the service concluded and the family prepared to depart for the cemetery, another event from which I had been explicitly excluded, I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Thomas Harrison, Mitchell's attorney and friend. "The will reading is at 2:00, he murmured. "Don't miss it." "They probably don't want me there either," I replied softly. A small smile touched his lips. "Oh, I think your presence is rather essential." Mitchell was quite specific about that. Lauren drove me home to change before the will reading. My tiny act of rebellion was to replace my black dress with a deep blue one, Mitchell's favorite color, the same shade as the sapphire in my wedding ring. "Are you sure you want to go through with this?" Lauren asked as she watched me apply lipstick with deliberate care. "You don't owe them anything. Mitchell's gone, Kat. You could just walk away, start fresh somewhere else." I met her eyes in the mirror. Mitchell knew they would try to erase me. He prepared for it. The least I can do is show up and let whatever he planned unfold. "And if it doesn't go the way you hope?" I capped my lipstick. "Then I'll have lost. Nothing more than I've already lost." The Walsh family home on Beacon Hill was a red brick federal mansion that had been in the family for generations. I had visited exactly twice, once for an uncomfortable Christmas dinner, and once for an even more uncomfortable birthday celebration for Eleonora. Both times, I had been treated like an interloper, tolerated rather than welcomed. Today would be no different. The same butler who had pointedly failed to take my coat on previous visits opened the door with practiced indifference. The same housekeeper who had once accidentally spilled tea on my dress directed me to the library with barely concealed disdain. The room was already full when I arrived. Family members arranged in a semicircle of antique chairs, their postures suggesting they were preparing for a theatrical performance rather than a will reading. Conversations hushed as I entered, heads turning, eyebrows raising. I heard Audrey's distinctive sniff of disapproval and saw Richard whisper something to the gray-haired man beside him. No one offered me a seat. I stood near the doorway, unwilling to press myself into their circle uninvited. Thomas Harrison caught my eye from across the room and gave me a reassuring nod. James Harrington, the family's attorney for 3 generations, cleared his throat. Now that everyone is present, we can begin the reading of Mitchell Edward Walsh III's last will and testament. James Harrington opened the leather portfolio with ceremonial precision. The silence in the library was absolute, broken only by the distant ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. I remained standing, acutely aware of being the only person without a seat, the physical manifestation of my status in the Walsh hierarchy. This will supersedes all previous versions and was executed 3 months ago, Harrington began, his voice carrying the practiced neutrality of someone who had mediated family tensions for decades. It has been properly witnessed and notarized. I noticed Richard shift uncomfortably in his seat. Eleanora's fingers tightened around her handkerchief. Thomas Harrison watched them with quiet attentiveness. I, Mitchell Edward Walsh III, being of sound mind and body, hereby declare this to be my last will and testament, Harrington read, the formal language echoing in the book-lined room. What followed was fairly standard: revocation of prior wills, appointment of executors, provisions for payment of debts. I listened with half an ear, still processing the reality that I was attending the will reading of my 32-year-old husband, a scenario that seemed impossible just a week ago. Then Harrington paused, adjusting his reading glasses. Before outlining specific bequests, I am instructed to read the following personal statement from Mitchell. This was unexpected. Eleanora frowned and Richard leaned forward. Neither had anticipated a personal message. To my family, Harrington read, I have always respected our heritage and the values that shaped me. The Walsh name has opened doors and provided privileges for which I am grateful. However, a name is not a destiny, and tradition is not an obligation. The greatest privilege of my life has been finding the courage to choose my own path and the fortune to find Catherine, who showed me what true partnership means. I felt tears threatening, but blinked them back. This was Mitchell's voice, the real Mitchell, breaking through the sanitized version his family had constructed. Catherine saw me not as a Walsh, but as Mitchell. She loved me for my compassion, not my connections, for my character, not my credentials. In 8 months of marriage, she gave me more authentic happiness than I had found in 45 years of meeting expectations. Audrey made a small, dismissive sound. Richard's face had reddened. Eleanora sat perfectly still as though carved from ice. I anticipate that my death will prompt attempts to minimize Catherine's role in my life and to challenge her rightful place as my wife and heir. This will has been carefully crafted to prevent such efforts. Any attempt to contest these provisions will result in the contesting party receiving nothing beyond what is explicitly stated herein. My eyes moved to Thomas Harrison, who gave me a slight nod. Now I understood why Mitchell had insisted I contact him. This will wasn't just about asset distribution. It was Mitchell's final act of protection. Now to the specific provisions. Harrington continued. To my mother, Eleanora Walsh, I leave my share of the family's summer property in Nantucket and an annual stipend of $150,000 for the remainder of her life, to be paid from the Walsh Family Trust. Eleanora's expression didn't change, but her knuckles whitened as she gripped her handkerchief tighter. To my brother Richard Walsh, I leave my collection of first-edition literature and my partnership shares in the Anderson Development Project, valued at approximately $4 million. Richard nodded, seemingly satisfied with this substantial bequest, though something in his expression suggested he had expected more. To my sister, Audrey Walsh Cunningham, I leave my art collection, excluding pieces specifically designated elsewhere, and my investment account at Fidelity, valued at approximately $8 million. Harrington continued through several minor bequests to cousins, friends, and charitable organizations. The room had grown increasingly tense, like a theater, audience sensing the approaching climax of a drama. "The remainder of my estate," Harrington said, his voice now carrying a weight that drew every eye in the room. "Including but not limited to our Cambridge residence. All financial accounts not specifically designated elsewhere, my majority shareholding. In Walsh Financial Holdings, my personal effects, and all other assets not explicitly bequeathed above, I leave to my beloved wife, Catherine Mercer Walsh, with the explicit instruction that her authority over these assets is absolute and without qualification." The silence that followed was deafening. I felt as though I'd been struck physically. Walsh Financial Holdings was the family's primary business, the source of their wealth and status for 3 generations. Mitchell had inherited his controlling interest from his father, who had received it from his father before him. By leaving me those shares, Mitchell had effectively placed the family legacy in my hands. "This is preposterous," Richard finally sputtered, breaking the silence. "The company's shares have always passed to a Walsh. Always." "Catherine is a Walsh," Thomas Harrison spoke for the first time, his voice calm but firm. "By marriage and now by inheritance." 8 months, Eleanor said, each word precise and cold. 8 months of marriage to a woman who clearly manipulated my son. This will is a travesty." Harrington cleared his throat. "Mrs. Walsh, I must remind you that the will includes an explicit non-contestation clause. Should you challenge these provisions, you risk losing your own inheritance." "There are grounds for challenging beyond contestation," Richard insisted, his legal training surfacing through his anger. "Undue influence, lack of testamentary capacity." "Mitchell was of perfectly sound mind," Thomas interrupted. "The will was executed with 2 independent physicians present specifically to document his capacity, along with video recording of the signing. As for undue influence, Mitchell approached me about these changes, not Catherine. In fact, she was unaware of the specific provisions until this moment." All eyes turned to me, standing silently by the door. Their expressions ranged from shock to disgust to calculation. In their eyes, I had somehow orchestrated this, manipulated their golden son into betraying his bloodline for a woman who had no business in their world. "I'd like to add," Thomas continued, "that Mitchell anticipated this reaction. He left a sealed letter with me to be opened only in the event that his family challenged Catherine's inheritance. The implied threat hung in the air. Whatever was in that letter, it was clearly meant as insurance against exactly this scenario." Harrington cleared his throat. "There is one final provision to be read." The room refocused on him, the tension, almost unbearable now. "To my family," he read, "I make one final request. Honor Catherine as you would have honored me. Welcome her as I would have welcomed your choices. The measure of a family is not in how it preserves tradition, but in how it embraces growth. Catherine represents everything good I discovered in myself too late in life. In respecting her, you respect the best parts of me." Mitchell's words landed like stones in still water, rippling through the silent room. For a moment, I glimpsed something like shame cross Eleanor's face, quickly masked by renewed composure. "This is not the end of this discussion," Richard said, standing abruptly. "The family will need to confer privately." "Of course," Harrington replied. "However, as executor, I am obligated to proceed with the transfer of assets as specified, unless there is a formal contest filed, which would trigger the penalty clauses." The family began to disperse, murmuring among themselves, casting glances at me that ranged from contemptuous to calculating. I remained where I was, still processing the implications of what had just occurred. Mitchell hadn't just left me provided for. He had left me powerful. The question was, What would I do with that power? Thomas approached me as the room emptied. Mitchell was very clear about what might happen, he said quietly. He wanted you to have leverage, not just assets. I don't want leverage, I replied, the words catching in my throat. I just wanted respect. In their world, those are often the same thing, he said with a sad smile. We should talk soon about next steps. The transfer of shares will require some paperwork, and you'll need to decide how actively you want to participate in the company management. The thought was overwhelming. I had gone from hospital administrator to controlling shareholder of a financial empire in the span of a week, all while grieving my husband. It felt surreal, like a plot from one of the novels Mitchell used to read to me on Sunday mornings. Ms. Walsh? It was the housekeeper, her previous disdain now tempered with an uncertain deference. Mrs. Walsh, the elder Mrs. Walsh, would like to speak with you in the conservatory. Thomas raised an eyebrow. Would you like me to accompany you? I shook my head. No, whatever this is, I need to face it myself. The conservatory was at the back of the house, a Victorian addition with glass walls and ceiling that filled the space with afternoon light. Tropical plants and orchids created a lush backdrop incongruous with the tension of the day. Eleonora sat on a white wrought iron bench, looking smaller somehow, less imposing than she had in the library. Please sit, she said, gesturing to the space beside her. Her voice lacked its usual imperial tone. I hesitated, then took a seat, keeping a careful distance between us. We sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the gentle bubbling of the small fountain in the corner. I didn't know my son as well as I thought I did, she finally said, her gaze fixed on a blooming orchid rather than on me. That became painfully clear today. I remained silent, unsure where this was heading. The Mitchell I knew was dutiful, traditional, respectful of his position. He understood his responsibilities to the family name. She smoothed an invisible wrinkle from her skirt. The Mitchell who wrote that will was a stranger to me. Or perhaps, I said carefully, he was always both. The dutiful son and the man searching for authenticity. People contain multitudes, Mrs. Walsh. She turned to look at me directly for, perhaps the first time. You speak well for someone with your background. Even her compliments were backhanded. My background includes a degree in healthcare administration and 10 years managing complex hospital systems. It's not Harvard, but it required intelligence and dedication. Yes? Well? She seemed momentarily disarmed. Mitchell clearly saw something in you that we missed. The question is what happens now? What happens now is that I honor Mitchell's wishes and memory, I replied. Beyond that, I haven't had time to think. Richard believes we should contest the will. He thinks Mitchell was not himself when he made these changes. And what do you think? She sighed, a small break in her perfect composure. I think my son found something with you that made him happier than I had seen him in years. I was too proud to acknowledge it then. That pride has cost me dearly. Her admission surprised me. This was not the imperious Eleonora I had come to know. Mitchell loved you, I said softly. Even when you disappointed him, he never wanted to hurt you. Yet he left me with a stipend, like a pensioner, while giving you control of the company my husband built. There was bitterness in her voice, but also something like grudging respect. He left me the company because he trusted me to do right by it and by the people who depend on it, I said, including his family. She studied me with new intensity. What exactly are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything today. I'm grieving my husband. But when I'm ready, I'd be open to discussing how we move forward in a way that honors Mitchell's wishes while respecting the Walsh legacy. It was an olive branch, tentatively extended. Not forgiveness, I wasn't ready for that, but an acknowledgement that scorched earth benefited no one. Eleonora nodded slowly. That would be acceptable. As I left the conservatory, I felt a shifting inside me, like tectonic plates realigning after an earthquake. I had entered the Walsh home as an unwelcome outsider. I was leaving as someone with a voice that could no longer be ignored. Mitchell had given me not just financial security, but the power to choose how I would engage with the family that had rejected me. Outside, the afternoon had turned golden, sunlight slanting across the cobblestones of Beacon Hill. Lauren was waiting in her car, as promised, scrolling through her phone. Her expression changed to alarm when she saw my face. What happened? Are they contesting it? Do we need to call a lawyer? I slid into the passenger seat, feeling oddly calm amid the chaos of the day. Mitchell left me controlling interest in the family company. Lauren's jaw dropped. He did what? It's a long story, I said, suddenly exhausted. Can we just go home? I need to process all this. As we drove back to Cambridge, I stared out the window, watching the city scroll by, the river glinting in the late afternoon sun, students lounging on the Harvard yard grass, ordinary people, living ordinary lives untouched by the drama that had consumed my world. I envied their normalcy, the luxury of mundane concerns. What are you going to do? Lauren asked as we crossed the bridge. About the company, I mean. I don't know, I answered honestly. I know nothing about running a financial holdings company. But you know everything about organizing complex systems and managing difficult personalities, she pointed out. Isn't that basically what you did at the hospital? Her observation startled me. It was almost exactly what Mitchell had said when we first met, that I understood systems, both human and organizational. I had dismissed it then as flattery. Now I wondered if he had seen something in me that I had never recognized in myself. My townhouse felt both comforting and painfully empty as I entered. Mitchell's presence lingered everywhere. His reading glasses on the side table, his favorite mug in the dish rack, the indent of his body still visible on his side of the bed. I moved through the rooms, touching these tangible remnants of our life together, anchoring myself in memories as my future rearranged itself around me. In his office, I found myself drawn back to the safe. Inside was another envelope I hadn't noticed before, this one marked, "For Catherine, after the will reading." My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a USB drive and a note in Mitchell's handwriting. Catherine, by now you know what I've done. The company is yours, not out. Of spite toward my family, but because I trust you more than anyone to steward it with integrity. You'll find on this drive everything you need. Organizational charts, financial statements, strategic plans, and my personal notes on key personnel. You're probably terrified right now. Good. Fear is appropriate when facing meaningful challenges. But remember what you told me about your first day managing the surgical department? I was completely overwhelmed until I remembered that systems are just people with processes, and I understand both. You understand both, Catherine. Better than I ever did. Better than Richard with his Harvard MBA or Mother with her lifetime of social connections. You see people clearly and processes logically. The company needs that more than it needs another Walsh making decisions based on tradition rather than merit. This isn't a burden I'm placing on you. It's an opportunity I'm offering. Take it or leave it, but choose for yourself, not for what you think I would want or what my family expects. Whatever you decide, I love you. That's the one certainty in all of this. Always, Mitchell. I sat with the letter for a long time, tears flowing freely now in the privacy of our home. Mitchell had seen me more clearly than I had seen myself. He had recognized strength where I saw only competence, potential where I saw only function. In his final act, he had given me not just resources, but a challenge to become the person he already believed me to be. The next morning, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt since Mitchell's death. I showered, dressed in a tailored suit I had Worn to hospital board meetings and made a series of phone calls. First to Thomas Harrison to arrange a meeting, then to Mitchell's assistant at Walsh Financial Holdings to schedule time to visit the offices. Finally, to Lauren, who answered. Groggily, "I need a favor," I said without preamble. "Can you come help me sort through some financial documents? I need to understand exactly what I'm dealing with." "Kat, it's 7 in the morning," she groaned. "And I have a financial empire to figure out," I replied, surprising myself with the determination in my voice. "I could use a friend who's good with spreadsheets." She was at my door an hour later with coffee and bagels. We spread the contents of the USB drive across the dining room table, printouts of financial statements, organizational charts, strategy documents, and Mitchell's personal notes on key executives and board members. "This is a lot," Lauren said, surveying the paper landscape. "Are you sure you want to take this on? You could just cash out, sell the shares back to the family." I considered the question seriously. Selling would be easier, certainly. I could walk away with enough money to live comfortably for the rest of my life, free from the Walsh family drama. It would be a clean break, a fresh start. But as I looked at Mitchell's careful notes, his assessments of which executives were innovative, which were resistant to change, which needed mentoring, I saw the care he had taken with the company and its people. This wasn't just about money or power. It was about responsibility to something larger than myself. "I'm going to try," I said finally. Not because Mitchell wanted me to, but because I think I might actually be good at it. Lauren nodded, a slow smile spreading across her face. "That's what I was hoping you'd say." Over the next week, I immersed myself in learning everything I could about Walsh Financial Holdings. I studied financial statements until my eyes burned. I researched industry trends and competitors. I read employee reviews on job sites to understand the company culture. By the time I met with Thomas Harrison, I had formulated at least the beginnings of a plan. "You've been busy," he observed as I laid out my initial thoughts. Mitchell would be impressed. "I'm not doing this for Mitchell," I said, though the words caught slightly in my throat. "I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do." Thomas nodded approvingly. "The company board meeting is next Thursday. As the majority shareholder, you have the right to attend. It will be your first official introduction to the company. Leadership." "Richard will be there," I noted. "He's a board member, isn't he?" "Yes, along with 2 other family members and 4 independent directors." Thomas gave me a considering look. "They'll be expecting you to either sell your shares or serve as a figurehead, while others manage the actual business. They'll underestimate you because of your background, your age, and your gender." "Let them," I said, a new confidence in my voice. Underestimation can be an advantage. The morning of the board meeting arrived with a crystalline autumn clarity. I chose my outfit carefully. Professional, but not flashy. Confident, but not aggressive. The Walsh Financial Holdings offices occupied the top 3 floors of a glass tower downtown. The company name emblazoned in understated bronze lettering on the lobby directory. As the elevator climbed to the executive floor, I felt a curious calm. The Catherine of 8 months ago would have been paralyzed by insecurity in this moment. But I was no longer that woman. Mitchell had seen something in me that I was only now beginning to recognize. His belief had planted a seed. His death, painful as it was, had forced that seed to grow. The reception area was sleek and modern, designed to convey stability and success without ostentation. The receptionist glanced up as I approached, her professional smile faltering as she recognized me from the funeral. "Mrs. Walsh," she said, her tone carefully neutral. "The board is gathering in the main conference room. May I show you the way?" I nodded, following her through the hushed corridors of power. Through glass walls, I could see the activity of the trading floor below, the pulse of the business Mitchell had inherited and transformed. Now it was my responsibility, not because I had sought it out, but because life had thrust it upon me, and I had chosen to rise to the challenge rather than retreat from it. The conference room door stood before me, the last threshold between my old life and whatever came next. I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and entered the room where Mitchell's family and colleagues waited, completely unaware that the one woman they had laughed at during her husband's funeral was about to change everything. The conference room fell silent as I entered. 7 faces turned toward me, expressions ranging from open hostility to careful neutrality. The long mahogany table gleamed under recessed lighting, each place set with a leather portfolio, water, glass, and nameplate. At the head of the table sat Richard, who had clearly assumed the chairman's position in Mitchell's absence. "Catherine," he said, not bothering to stand, "we weren't expecting you so early." "The meeting is scheduled for 9, I replied, checking my watch. "It's 8:55. An older man with silver hair and horn-rimmed glasses rose to his feet. "Mrs. Walsh, I'm Harrison Thornfield. I served on this board with your husband for 15 years. Please accept my condolences." His courtesy stood in stark contrast to Richard's coldness. I shook his offered hand. "Thank you, Mr. Thornfield." One by one, the other independent directors introduced themselves. Barbara Chen, a sharp-eyed woman in her 60s who had pioneered ethical investment strategies, James Livingston, formerly of the Treasury Department, and Devin Carter, whose technology expertise had helped modernize the company's systems. The remaining Walsh family representatives, Cousin Philip, and Uncle George, offered curt nods without standing. I took the empty seat that had been Mitchell's, directly opposite Richard. Thomas Harrison slipped in just as the clock struck 9 and took the seat beside me, giving me a reassuring nod. "Now that we're all here," Richard began, "let's call this meeting to order. First, I'd like to acknowledge the tragic loss of my brother, Mitchell, whose leadership was instrumental to this company's success over the past decade." Murmurs of agreement circled the table. Richard continued, "In light of recent developments, we have several pressing matters to address regarding the company's leadership and direction moving forward." "If I may," Thomas interjected smoothly, "traditional protocol suggests we should first formally recognize the change in majority ownership and welcome Mrs. Walsh to her first board meeting." Richard's jaw tightened. "Of course. The board acknowledges Catherine Mercer Walsh's inheritance of Mitchell's shares and welcomes her as a significant shareholder." "Majority shareholder," Thomas corrected quietly but firmly. "Indeed," Richard conceded, the word clipped. "Now, as I was saying, our first order of business is to address the leadership vacuum created by Mitchell's passing. The executive committee recommends appointing an interim CEO while conducting a thorough search for a permanent replacement. I am prepared to step into this role temporarily to ensure continuity." I studied the faces around the table. The independent directors appeared thoughtful but non-committal. The family representatives nodded enthusiastically at Richard's suggestion. "Before we move to a vote," I said, speaking for the first time since the meeting began, "I'd like to better understand the company's current strategic position and challenges. As the majority shareholder, I need to ensure any leadership transition aligns with the company's best interests." Richard's expression flickered between surprise and annoyance. He clearly hadn't expected me to speak, let alone question his proposal. "Catherine," he said, his tone patronizing, "these are complex matters requiring financial expertise and industry knowledge. Perhaps it would be best if you allowed the board to handle these decisions while you take time to grieve." Harrison Thornfield cleared his throat. "Actually, I think Mrs. Walsh's request is entirely reasonable. I'd be happy to provide an overview of our current strategic position." For the next 30 minutes, Thornfield walked through the company's major business units, recent performance metrics, and competitive challenges. Barbara Chen added insights about emerging opportunities in sustainable investing. Throughout their presentations, I listened intently, connecting what I was hearing with the research I had done over the past week. "Thank you," I said when they finished. "This is extremely helpful. If I understand correctly, the company's traditional wealth management services are stable but showing minimal growth, while the newer fintech division and sustainable investment platforms are outperforming projections." "That's an accurate summary," Chen confirmed, looking slightly impressed. "And the main challenges are industry consolidation pressure, fee compression from automated services, and talent retention in the technology division," I continued. Thornfield nodded. "Precisely." I turned to Richard. "Given these challenges, what specific qualifications do you believe make you the ideal interim CEO, particularly regarding the growth areas in technology and sustainable investing?" The room went so quiet you could have heard a pin drop. Richard's face flushed slowly, like a thermometer rising. He clearly hadn't expected to be questioned, especially not by me. "I have 20 years of experience in finance and have served as Chief Operating Officer for the past 5, he answered stiffly. "I understand this company's operations better than anyone in this room." "Operations, yes," I acknowledged. "But Mitchell's vision, from what I understand, was increasingly focused on innovation and diversification. The company's 5-year strategic plan emphasizes digital transformation and ethical investment platforms, areas where your experience seems limited." Uncle George scoffed. "And I suppose you think you could do better? A hospital administrator? With no financial background?" I met his gaze steadily. "I didn't say that, Mr. Walsh. I'm simply trying to ensure we select leadership aligned with the company's strategic needs, not just based on familial connection." "Catherine raises valid points," Barbara Chen said unexpectedly. "Richard, your operational expertise is valuable, but Mitchell was leading us in new directions that require different skill sets." Richard's knuckles whitened around his pen. "I'm well aware of Mitchell's vision and fully committed to continuing it. Perhaps," I suggested, "we should consider a different approach. Rather than rushing to appoint an interim CEO today, we could establish a transition committee including board members and key executives to manage operations while conducting a thorough leadership search." Devin Carter, the technology expert who had been quiet until now, nodded approvingly. "That's actually quite sensible. It would give us time for proper due diligence." "I agree," Chen said. "A hasty decision now could destabilize the company further." I could see Richard calculating his options. Opposing my suggestion directly would make him appear self-interested rather than concerned for the company's welfare. But accepting meant delaying his ascension to power. "A transition committee. As merit," he finally conceded, "though I maintain that strong, decisive leadership is critical during this period." "Then let's put it to a vote," Thornfield suggested. "The proposal is to establish a transition committee rather than appointing an interim CEO immediately." The vote was 5-3 in favor, with only Richard, Philip, and Uncle George opposing. I had won my first boardroom battle, not through confrontation, but through reasoned persuasion. The look of grudging surprise on the independent directors' faces told me they had expected either a pushover or a vindictive adversary. I had shown myself to be neither. As the meeting progressed through financial reports and operational updates, I continued to ask thoughtful questions, demonstrating that I had done my homework. By the time we broke for lunch, the atmosphere had shifted subtly. The independent directors were engaging with me directly rather than deferring to Richard. Even Cousin Philip seemed uncertain about how to regard me now. During the lunch break, Barbara Chen approached me as I refilled my water glass. "That was impressive," she said without preamble. "You came prepared." "Mitchell left detailed notes," I replied. "And I spent the past week studying everything I could about the company." Chen smiled slightly. "Mitchell always said you were smarter than people gave you credit for." I see he wasn't exaggerating. "You knew about me?" I asked, surprised. "Mitchell spoke of you often, at least to me. He was proud of your perspective. Said you saw things others missed." She glanced toward Richard, who was huddled with Uncle George across the room. The family never accepted you because they feared exactly what's happening now, an outsider gaining influence over their legacy. But Mitchell believed the company needed fresh perspectives to survive. Her words strengthened something in me. Mitchell hadn't just loved me. He had valued my mind, my approach, my different way of seeing. He had left me the company not just out of love, but out of genuine belief in my capabilities. When the meeting reconvened, the agenda turned to the composition of the transition committee. Richard proposed himself as chair, with Philip and 2 executive vice presidents as members. "If I may," I interjected, "I'd like to suggest a more balanced committee. Perhaps Richard as chief operating officer should certainly be included, but also Barbara Chen representing the board's independent directors, Ashok Patel from the FinTech division, and Grace Liu from Sustainable Investments. Those divisions are relatively small compared to our core business," Richard objected. "But they represent our growth areas," I countered. "If we're planning for the future, not just maintaining the past, they deserve representation." The subtle shift in the room was palpable. My suggestion was not self-serving. I wasn't placing myself on the committee or packing it with allies. I was proposing a genuinely balanced approach that aligned with the company's strategic direction. After some discussion, a modified version of my proposal passed, with Richard as committee chair but balanced by Chen, Patel, and another executive with technology experience. It wasn't exactly what I had suggested, but it was far better than Richard's initial power play. As the meeting wound down, I felt exhausted but satisfied. I had established myself as a serious presence on the board, not a grieving widow to be managed or manipulated. The battle for control was far from over, but I had proven I would not be easily dismissed. When Richard finally adjourned the meeting, he approached me directly for the first time. "You've clearly been coached well," he said quietly. "Thomas has always been thorough." "I appreciate the compliment," I replied evenly. "Though you're mistaken if you think I'm simply following a script. Mitchell believed in my abilities. It's time I did too. This company has been in Walsh hands for 3 generations, he said, his voice tight. It's our legacy, our identity. And it will remain successful and respected, I assured him. That's what I want too, Richard. We may disagree on methods, but surely we share that goal. He studied me for a long moment, reassessing. Perhaps we do, but make no mistake, this isn't over. The family won't accept an outsider controlling our company indefinitely. I'm not an outsider, I reminded him. I'm Mitchell's wife and your sister-in-law. Whether you accept that or not doesn't change the reality. As I gathered my things to leave, Thornfield approached with Carter and Chen flanking him. Mrs. Walsh? He said formally. We typically have a small dinner after board meetings to discuss matters less formally. We'd be pleased if you would join us. I understood the significance of the invitation. This was where the real business often happened, away from formal minutes and recorded votes. By including me, they were acknowledging my legitimate place at the table. I'd be delighted, I answered, catching Richard's scowl from across the room. The restaurant was an old-school steakhouse frequented by Boston's business elite. Dark wood, leather booths, discreet service. As we settled into a private dining room, I sensed this was a test as much as an invitation. These directors wanted to take my measure in a social setting, to see if I could navigate these waters as well as I had the boardroom. Catherine, Thornfield began once drinks had been served. I hope you don't mind plain speaking. We're all curious about your intentions for the company. I appreciated his directness. My immediate intention is to learn about the business, the industry, and the people who make Walsh Financial successful. Beyond that, I want to honor Mitchell's vision while ensuring the company thrives in a changing marketplace. And your role specifically? Chen asked. Do you see yourself as an active chairperson or more of a traditional majority shareholder? It was the question everyone had been dancing around all day. Would I try to run the company despite my lack of industry experience, or would I remain a passive owner, collecting dividends while others made decisions? I see myself as neither figurehead nor micromanager, I answered carefully. I believe my value lies in bringing fresh perspective and ensuring the company doesn't become trapped in "we've always done it this way" thinking. But I also recognize what I don't know and the expertise others bring. Carter nodded approvingly. Refreshing to hear. Too many new leaders either abdicate responsibility entirely or try to control everything without understanding the complexities. Mitchell mentioned your background in systems management, Chen commented. He seemed to think it translated well to our industry challenges. Healthcare and finance are different worlds, I acknowledged, but both involve complex systems, with multiple stakeholders, competing priorities, and the need to balance innovation with stability. In healthcare administration, I learned to identify when procedures exist to ensure quality and when they're just calcified habits. As dinner progressed, the conversation flowed more naturally. These were smart, accomplished people who had respected Mitchell and were cautiously extending that respect to me. By dessert, we had moved beyond polite professional topics to more substantive discussions about industry trends and the company's positioning. You know, Thornfield said as we waited for coffee, Richard was convinced you would either sell your shares back to the family or be a puppet for whatever advisors Mitchell had arranged. He's quite shaken by today's events. Richard underestimates me, I replied simply, as did Mitchell's entire family. That's been their consistent mistake. And a costly one, Chen added with a small smile. Mitchell chose better than they knew. When I finally arrived home that evening, exhaustion hit me like a physical wave. I kicked off my heels, hung up my suit jacket, and collapsed onto the sofa, mentally replaying the day's events. For the first time since Mitchell's death, I had spent hours without grief as my primary emotion. Instead, I had been focused, strategic, engaged, alive in a way I hadn't expected to feel again so soon. The house phone rang, startling me from my thoughts. Few people called the landline. It was mainly Mitchell's family members who refused to use my cell number. Catherine Walsh speaking, I answered formally, half expecting Richard or Eleonora. Catherine, it's Thomas. Harrison's voice sounded pleased. I've just had calls from both Thornfield and Chen. You made quite an impression today. I was just being myself, I said truthfully. That's exactly what worked. They expected either a grieving wreck or an angry avenger. You showed them a capable, thoughtful businesswoman instead. He paused. Mitchell would be proud, but more importantly, you should be proud of yourself. After we hung up, I wandered into Mitchell's office, drawn to the space where he had made the decisions that shaped our lives. On his desk sat a framed photo of us from our wedding day. Not a formal portrait, but a candid shot someone had taken during our first dance. Mitchell was looking at me with unmistakable love and pride as I laughed at something he'd said. I felt you there today, I told his image softly. Not because I was trying to channel you or guess what you would do, but because you helped me recognize my own strength before I could see it myself. I ran my fingers along the spines of his business books, pulling out one on corporate governance that I had begun reading. Life had changed irrevocably, but I was changing with it rather than being crushed beneath it. The following morning brought another challenge. The quarterly meeting with the company's top 20 executives was scheduled, a gathering Mitchell had always led to align leadership across divisions. Richard had assumed he would run it in Mitchell's absence, but as majority shareholder and board member, I had every right to attend. I arrived early, choosing to wait in Mitchell's office rather than the conference room. His corner space remained untouched since his death, family photos still on the credenza, industry awards. On the walls, the elegant chess set we had bought in London still set up mid-game. I settled behind his desk, reviewing my notes one last time. A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. It was Mitchell's executive assistant, Andrea, her expression a mixture of surprise and uncertainty at finding me in her late boss's chair. "Mrs. Walsh, I didn't realize you'd be here today." "Please call me Catherine," I said, rising to shake her hand. "And yes, I'll be attending the leadership meeting." She hesitated. "Mr. Richard Walsh has already sent an agenda. He's planning to run the meeting." "I see. Would you mind updating the executives that I'll be joining as well? No need to change the agenda." Andrea nodded, her professional composure quickly returning. "Of course. The meeting begins in 20 minutes. Can I get you anything in the meantime?" "Just some background if you don't mind," I replied. "How long did you work with Mitchell?" 6 years, she answered. "He hired me straight out of business school when no one else would take a chance on someone with no experience." That sounded like Mitchell, seeing potential where others required proof. "He valued loyalty and competence above credentials," I observed. "Did you enjoy working with him?" Something in Andrea softened. "Very much. He was demanding but fair. He never took credit for others' work, and he defended his team fiercely." She hesitated, then added, "The past few days have been uncomfortable. There's been a lot of uncertainty, people positioning themselves. Richard has been making promises and threats, depending on who he's talking to." This candid insight was valuable. "Thank you for your honesty, Andrea. Change is always unsettling, but I hope to provide some clarity today." When I entered the conference room 15 minutes later, the room was already half full of executives in various stages of pre-meeting small talk. Conversations faltered as they noticed me, confusion evident on many faces. Richard stood near the head of the table, clearly mid-discussion with several division heads. His expression darkened when he saw me. "Catherine," he said loudly enough, for everyone to hear. "This is an operational leadership meeting. You don't need to trouble yourself with these details." The dismissal was intentional, designed to diminish me in front of the executive team. 8 days ago, I might have retreated in the face of such a public challenge, but I was no longer that person. "Good morning, everyone," I said, addressing the room rather than Richard. "For those I haven't had the pleasure of meeting yet, I'm Catherine Walsh. I appreciate your continuing leadership during this difficult transition." Mitchell always spoke highly of this team's talent and dedication. I moved toward the table, not to the head where Richard had positioned himself, but to an open seat midway down. This was deliberate. I wasn't trying to usurp his role, but I also wouldn't be relegated to observer status. "I look forward to learning more about your respective areas and how we can support your success moving forward," I continued. "Please proceed with the agenda as planned, Richard." By taking a collaborative rather than confrontational approach, I had defused the tension Richard tried to create while still establishing my presence. The executives exchanged glances, recalibrating their understanding of the new power dynamics. Richard had no choice but to begin the meeting as scheduled, though his irritation was evident in his clipped tone. As each division head reported on their quarterly results, I listened attentively, asking occasional questions that demonstrated I had done my homework on their areas. When Grace Liu from Sustainable Investments mentioned challenges in recruiting specialized talent, I saw an opportunity. "Have you considered partnering with the Environmental Sciences Department at Northeastern?" I asked. "They have an excellent program that might provide internship candidates with exactly the background you're seeking." Liu looked surprised, but intrigued. I wasn't aware of that program. "Mitchell mentioned it a few months ago," I explained. "I believe he had asked Andrea to schedule a meeting with their department chair, though I'm not sure if that occurred before." I let the sentence trail off, the implication clear. "It was on his calendar for next month," Andrea confirmed from her seat along the wall where she was taking notes. This small exchange accomplished several things simultaneously. It connected me to Mitchell's operational knowledge demonstrated my attention to specific business challenges rather than just financial outcomes, and showed I was interested in solutions rather than control. As the meeting progressed, I continued this approach, engaged but not domineering, knowledgeable but not pretending expertise I didn't possess. By the halfway point, several executives were directing their comments to me as well as Richard, a subtle but significant shift. During a break, Ashok Patel from the FinTech division approached me. "Mrs. Walsh, I was hoping to discuss a project Mitchell and I were developing before." He paused, searching for the right words. "Before he died," I said gently. "It's okay to say it directly, Mr. Patel." He nodded, seeming relieved at my straightforwardness. "Yes. We were exploring a partnership with a tech startup that's developed an AI-driven financial planning tool." Mitchell was excited about the potential, but now Richard is suggesting we shelve the initiative as non-core business. "Tell me more about it," I encouraged. As Patel outlined the project, an innovative approach to making sophisticated financial planning accessible to middle-income clients, his passion was evident. This was exactly the kind of forward-thinking initiative Mitchell had championed, expanding the company's reach beyond traditional wealthy clients. "It sounds promising," I said. "Would you send me the full proposal? I'd like to review it before making any recommendations." Patel's relief was palpable. "Of course. Thank you for considering it." As the meeting resumed, I noticed Richard watching this exchange with narrowed eyes. He recognized what was happening. Executives were beginning to see me as an alternative, power center, someone who might champion their ideas when he wouldn't. The company's culture was shifting beneath his feet. By the meeting's end, a new dynamic had emerged. Richard maintained formal authority as COO and Transition Committee Chair, but my presence had created space for voices and ideas that might otherwise have been suppressed. I had positioned myself not as a rival to Richard, but as a balancing force focused on innovation and inclusion rather than control. As the executives filed out, several stopped to introduce themselves more formally or to mention projects they had discussed with Mitchell. I made a point of thanking each of them for their continued leadership during the transition. Richard observed this from across the room, his expression unreadable. When we were finally alone, he approached me directly. "Quite the performance," he said coldly. "You've been busy making allies." "I've been busy learning about the company Mitchell loved," I corrected. "These people aren't pawns, Richard. They're talented professionals who deserve to be heard." "And you think 1 week of cramming company reports qualifies you to evaluate their ideas?" His tone was scathing. "No," I acknowledged. "But my outsider perspective might help identify assumptions worth questioning." Mitchell valued that kind of thinking. Richard's facade cracked slightly. "You didn't know my brother like I did. 20 years in business together, 46 years as family. 8 months of marriage doesn't compare." For the first time, I glimpsed the real pain beneath his hostility, not just thwarted ambition but genuine grief complicated by resentment. Richard had lost not only his brother but the future he had envisioned alongside him. Now he was forced to deal with me instead, a constant reminder of the brother who had chosen a different path than the one laid out for him. "You're right," I said softly. "I knew a different Mitchell than you did. We both have pieces of him, Richard. Neither of us has the complete picture." Something shifted in his expression, not warmth or acceptance, but perhaps the beginning of recognition that I wasn't simply an obstacle to be removed. "The Transition Committee meets tomorrow at 10, he said finally. "I assume you'll want to attend as an observer." "I would appreciate that," I replied, accepting the small olive branch for what it was. As I gathered my things to leave, Andrea appeared at the door. "Mrs. Walsh, there's a call for you. It's Mrs. Eleanora Walsh." She's quite insistent. Richard and I exchanged glances of surprise. Eleanora calling me at the office was unexpected. I'll take it in Mitchell's office, I said, curious what new development this might signal. As I walked back to the corner office that still held so much of Mitchell's presence, I steeled myself for whatever might come next. 1 week into my new reality, I had established myself as a force to be reckoned with in the boardroom and executive suite. But the family battle was far from over, and Eleanora Walsh had decades of experience wielding influence in Boston's highest circles. I picked up the phone, wondering what new challenge awaited me on the other end of the line. Catherine. Eleanora's voice carried through the phone with its familiar clipped precision. I've just had a rather illuminating conversation with Harrison Thornfield. I settled into Mitchell's chair, running my fingers along the smooth leather armrest. I see. And what did Mr. Thornfield have to say? He seems quite impressed with you. Her tone suggested she found this surprising. He mentioned you've been actively participating in board discussions rather than simply deferring to advisors. That's correct, I confirmed. Mitchell believed I could contribute meaningfully to the company. I intend to honor that confidence. There was a pause, the soft sound of ice clinking in a glass on her end. When we spoke after the will reading, I assumed your talk of respecting the Walsh legacy while moving forward was simply diplomatic conversation. I meant every word, I said. The question is whether the Walsh family can accept my role in shaping that legacy going forward. Another pause, longer this time. I'd like to meet with you. Not at the house, somewhere. More neutral. Perhaps tea at the Gardner Museum tomorrow afternoon? We have a private room there for benefactors. The Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum was Eleanora's territory. Old Boston money, art patronage, established society. She was inviting me into her world, but on her terms. Still, it was an invitation rather than a summons. I can be there at 3, I replied. Good. Come alone, please. No lawyers. The line went dead before I could respond. Classic Eleanora. Maintaining control of the conversation until the very end, I replaced the receiver and sat back, contemplating what this meeting might mean. Eleanora wasn't one for social niceties or wasted gestures. If she wanted to meet, she had a specific purpose in mind. Andrea appeared in the doorway. Is everything all right, Mrs. Walsh? Yes, thank you. And please, it's Catherine. I stood gathering my notes. I'll need to adjust my schedule for tomorrow afternoon. I have a meeting at the Gardner Museum at 3. Andrea's eyebrows rose slightly. She clearly understood the significance of an invitation to Eleanora's inner sanctum. Of course, I'll rearrange your calendar. Andrea, I said, as a thought occurred to me, how long have you known the Walsh family? Almost 20 years, she replied. I worked for Mitchell's father before joining Mitchell's team. Then you know Eleanora. Well? A careful pause. As well as anyone who isn't family or from her social circle. And if she invites someone to tea at the Gardner. Andrea's professional demeanor slipped just enough to reveal a knowing smile. It means she's reassessing her position. Mrs. Walsh doesn't waste time on lost causes or insignificant opponents. I nodded, absorbing this insight. Thank you, Andrea. That's very helpful. The next 24 hours passed in a whirlwind of preparation. I attended the transition committee meeting as an observer, noting the tension between Richard's cautious approach and the more innovative strategies championed by Barbara Chen and Ashok Patel. I reviewed detailed analyses of the company's market position prepared by the strategy team. I even spent an hour with the CFO, asking targeted questions about cash flow projections and capital allocation. Throughout it all, I was building not just knowledge, but relationships. I made a point of learning names, remembering personal details, expressing genuine interest in people's perspectives. These were the skills I'd honed in hospital administration. Creating functional systems required understanding the human components first. By the time I arrived at the Gardner Museum the following afternoon, I felt prepared not just for Eleonora, but for whatever future awaited me at Walsh Financial Holdings. I had chosen my outfit carefully, a deep burgundy dress with a tailored blazer, professional without being severe, confident without being flashy. My wedding ring and Mitchell's grandmother's sapphire caught the light as I followed the museum docent through the courtyard to a private room tucked behind the tapestry. Gallery. Eleonora waited like a queen holding court, perfectly poised in a high-backed chair beside a table set for afternoon tea. Her silver hair was immaculate, her pearls gleaming against a navy silk blouse. At 72, she remained striking, her features sharp but dignified, her posture impeccable. "Catherine," she acknowledged as I entered, "thank you for coming." "Thank you for the invitation," I replied, taking the seat across from her. "The museum is beautiful." "Isabella Gardner was a woman who understood power," Eleonora said, pouring tea from a silver service. "She built this place against considerable opposition in an era when women were expected to limit their ambitions to charitable committees and children's education." I accepted the offered cup. She created something lasting. Indeed. Eleonora studied me over the rim of her teacup. "You've made quite an impression at the company. Richard is concerned." "Change is often concerning," I acknowledged, especially when it's unexpected. "Is that what you're bringing to Walsh Financial? Change?" I considered my response carefully. Evolution rather than revolution. The company needs to adapt to remain competitive, but there's tremendous value in its history and culture. Eleonora nodded slightly, as though I'd passed some small test. Mitchell always pushed for innovation. Richard preferred stability. Their father balanced both instincts effectively. "And you?" I asked. "Which do you value more?" Her eyebrows rose at my directness. "Survival, which sometimes requires stability and sometimes demands change. The trick is knowing which moment you're in." A server appeared with a tiered tray of delicate sandwiches and pastries, then disappeared as silently as she had come. "You've surprised everyone," Eleonora continued once we were alone again. "The family expected histrionics at the funeral, demands at the will reading, and incompetence at the company. You've provided none of those." "I'm not interested in meeting expectations," I replied. "I'm interested in honoring Mitchell's legacy while building my own." "And what is your vision for that legacy, Catherine?" The question carried weight. This wasn't idle conversation. It was a strategic assessment. "A company that maintains its commitment to client service and financial excellence while expanding its reach beyond traditional wealth management," I said. Mitchell believed financial expertise shouldn't be reserved for the already wealthy. He saw technology and sustainable investing as ways to serve broader markets without compromising quality. Eleonora's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in her eyes. Recognition, perhaps. "He spoke to you about the company's future." "We talked about everything," I said simply. "That's what marriage should be." She placed her teacup down with deliberate precision. "My husband and I were married for 47 years. Edward built Walsh Financial from a modest investment firm to a major regional player. But he never discussed business strategy with me." The admission surprised me. "Never?" "It wasn't considered appropriate in our generation. He managed the company. I managed our social position and raised the children." A faint smile touched her lips. "Though I did occasionally offer suggestions through carefully orchestrated dinner conversations with board members." I saw a glimmer of the shrewd intelligence that had navigated Boston society for decades. Eleonora might have been constrained by her era's expectations, but she had found ways to exercise influence nonetheless. "Mitchell valued transparency," I said. "He believed keeping secrets created unnecessary complications." "A modern perspective," she noted, "and perhaps a luxury afforded by changing times." We ate in silence for a moment, the subtle power dynamics of the conversation settling between us. Finally, Eleonora placed her napkin beside her plate and fixed me with a direct gaze. "I've been considering our position," she said, "the family's position, regarding you and the company." I waited, sensing she had rehearsed whatever came next. Initially, Richard advocated contesting the will on grounds of undue influence. Several family members supported this approach. She straightened an already perfectly positioned fork. "I have decided against that course of action." This was significant. Without Eleonora's backing, Richard would struggle to mount an effective legal challenge. "May I ask what influenced your decision?" I kept my tone neutral, though my heart had accelerated. "3 factors," she replied with characteristic precision. First, the legal battle would be lengthy, expensive, and potentially damaging to the company's reputation. Second, the evidence suggests Mitchell was of sound mind and acting independently when he revised his will. And third, she hesitated. "For the first time, I have come to believe that my son knew exactly what he was doing when he left you his shares." The admission clearly cost her something. Acknowledging Mitchell's deliberate choice meant accepting that he had predicted his family's reaction and taken steps to counter it. "He loved you," I said softly. "All of you. He just didn't always agree with you." "Mitchell was always the independent one," she said, a hint of something like pride in her voice. "Even as a child, he questioned everything." Richard accepted the path laid out for him. Mitchell created his own. She reached into an elegant leather handbag beside her chair and withdrew an envelope, placing it on the table between us. "What's this?" I asked. "A proposal," she answered. "A compromise that would allow you to maintain your inheritance while addressing the family's concerns about company control." I made no move to take the envelope. "I'm happy to hear any proposal, but I should be clear that I don't intend to relinquish my role at Walsh Financial." "Open it," she instructed. "It's not what you think." I slid my finger under the flap and removed several pages of heavy stationery covered in Eleonora's elegant handwriting. As I read, my surprise grew. This wasn't a buyout offer or an attempt to sideline me. It was a detailed framework for restructuring the board and executive team, creating clearer boundaries between ownership and management while preserving the company's connection to the Walsh family. The proposal would expand the board to include more independent directors with specific expertise in growth areas. Richard would become executive chairman, focusing on client relationships and maintaining the Walsh family brand. A new CEO would be recruited from outside to bring fresh perspective. And I would chair a newly formed innovation committee with substantial resources and autonomy. "This is thoughtful," I said finally, genuinely impressed. "It addresses many of the concerns I've had about the current structure." "Mitchell wasn't the only strategic thinker in the family," Eleonora said with the faintest hint of smugness. "I've been watching boards operate for 50 years, even if I was rarely invited to join them." "The Innovation Committee is particularly interesting," I noted. "It would allow me to focus on the areas where I might add the most value." "Precisely. Your background in systems management and fresh perspective could drive meaningful growth in new markets without disrupting the core business." She took a small sip of tea. "And Richard's talents for relationship management and operational stability would be properly utilized." I studied her with new appreciation. Eleonora had identified a solution that allowed everyone to save face while potentially strengthening the company. It was elegant, pragmatic, and politically astute. "You've clearly given this significant thought," I said. "May I ask what prompted such a detailed proposal?" Eleonora straightened, her posture somehow becoming even more perfect. "I had a conversation with Thomas Harrison yesterday. He shared something Mitchell told him shortly after your marriage." I waited, curious what Mitchell might have confided. Mitchell said, "Catherine sees systems the way painters see color, dimensions and connections invisible to the rest of us." He believed your perspective was exactly what the company needed to evolve. She paused, then added with reluctance, I think he may have been right. The acknowledgement stunned me. This wasn't just a strategic compromise. It was a personal recognition of my potential value to the company Mitchell had loved. Thank you for sharing that, I said softly. It means a great deal. Don't mistake this for sentimentality, Eleonora warned, though her tone lacked its usual edge. This is about preserving and strengthening a company that has supported our family for generations. Your presence has created disruption, but perhaps that disruption was necessary. I considered the proposal again, seeing the careful balance it struck. I'd like to discuss this with my advisors, but my initial reaction is positive. If the board were supportive, this could work. I've already spoken with Thornfield and Chen privately, Eleonora admitted. They find the framework promising. Richard will resist initially, but he's practical enough to recognize a workable compromise. We spent the next hour discussing specifics, timeline, communication strategy, potential CEO candidates. Throughout our conversation, I was struck by Eleonora's command of business details she had supposedly never been privy to. The woman who had been dismissed as merely Mitchell's society-conscious mother revealed herself to be shrewd, knowledgeable, and surprisingly adaptable. As our meeting concluded, she fixed me with a penetrating look. Catherine, may I offer some personal advice? Of course, I replied, curious. Power, once acquired, must be wielded with purpose or it becomes merely possession. She gathered her things with practiced efficiency. Mitchell understood this. It's why he built rather than merely maintained. And what purpose would you suggest for me? I asked. Her eyes, so like Mitchell's in their clarity, met mine directly. That's for you to determine. But make it worthy of the sacrifice it required. I understood her meaning immediately. Mitchell's death had given me this position. Whatever I did with it needed to honor that terrible cost. As we parted ways in the museum courtyard, Eleonora surprised me with a final comment. Sunday dinner is at 6. I expect you'll be joining us from now on. It wasn't a question or even an invitation, more a recognition of a new reality. I was a Walsh now, for better or worse. Not fully accepted, perhaps, but acknowledged. I'll bring dessert, I replied simply. The following weeks unfolded with surprising momentum. Eleonora's proposal, refined by legal teams and board input, was approved at a special meeting. Richard's initial resistance dissolved when key clients expressed support for the new structure. The search for a CEO began with a clear mandate for someone who could bridge traditional wealth management and emerging fintech opportunities. My role as Innovation Committee Chair gave me both meaningful work and a platform to prove my value beyond my connection to Mitchell. I assembled a team that included rising talents from across the company, people whose ideas had previously struggled to find support in the traditional hierarchy. 3 months after Mitchell's death, we launched our first major initiative, a financial wellness platform designed for middle-income professionals who wouldn't normally have access to sophisticated financial planning. The pilot program filled its slots within hours, generating positive press and industry attention. Richard, to his credit, embraced his role as executive chairman with genuine commitment. His client relationship skills and institutional knowledge complemented the new structure, and our professional relationship, while never warm, developed into a functional respect. Eleonora became an unexpected ally, her decades of social connections opening doors that might otherwise have remained closed to me. Though she never explicitly apologized for the funeral slight or the initial hostility, her actions spoke of a reassessment. She began introducing me at social functions as my son's wife, Catherine, who chairs innovation at Walsh Financial, a significant evolution from her previous pointed omissions. 6 months after that fateful day at Mitchell's funeral, I stood at the podium during our annual client appreciation event. The ballroom of the Four Seasons Hotel was filled with the company's most valuable clients, board members, executives, and staff. As Innovation Committee Chair, I was presenting our strategic vision for the coming year. Walsh Financial Holdings has always understood that true wealth management isn't just about preserving assets, I began, looking out at faces that had become familiar over the months. It's about creating security that allows for possibility. For 70 years, we've provided that security for clients with significant resources. Today, we're extending that mission to new markets and new generations. As I outlined our expanded initiatives, digital platforms for younger investors, sustainable portfolios for environmentally conscious clients, simplified planning tools for educators and healthcare workers, I caught Eleonora's eye from her table near the front. She gave me the slightest nod of approval. These initiatives honor our past while embracing our future, I continued. They reflect the values that have always defined this company: excellence, integrity, and forward-thinking leadership. From the corner of my eye, I saw Andrea slip into the ballroom through a side door, holding a document with the distinctive letterhead of our legal department. She caught my attention with a subtle gesture, indicating the paper held something significant. Before I continue, I said, momentarily, departing from my prepared remarks, I'd like to acknowledge the tremendous team effort that has made this progress possible. From our board of directors to our newest associates, every person at Walsh Financial has contributed to this evolution. As I completed my presentation to enthusiastic applause, Andrea approached the stage, discreetly handing me the document. As I stepped away from the podium, "It just came through," she whispered. "I thought you'd want to see it immediately." I scanned the contents quickly, my heart racing. The document was confirmation that our middle-income financial planning platform had received regulatory approval for national expansion months ahead of schedule. This wasn't just a victory for my innovation strategy. It was validation of Mitchell's vision for a more inclusive approach to wealth management. As the evening progressed into dinner, I found myself seated between Richard and a major client, conversation flowing more naturally than I could have imagined 6 months earlier. When Richard was pulled away to greet a late arrival, Thornfield took his empty seat. "Quite a triumph, Catherine," he said, nodding toward the document now tucked in my portfolio. "National approval already. The board is impressed." "It's the team's triumph," I corrected. "I just helped clear the obstacles." "That's leadership," he noted. "And speaking of leadership, the CEO search committee has narrowed to 3 finalists. We'll be conducting final interviews next week." "That's excellent progress," I said. "I'm looking forward to completing our executive team." Thornfield hesitated, then added, "Several board members have suggested we should be considering internal candidates as well. Your name has come up repeatedly." I nearly choked on my water. "For CEO? That's unexpected." "Is it?" He raised an eyebrow. "You've demonstrated strategic vision, built effective teams, and navigated complex relationships. Your lack of traditional finance background is offset by your systems expertise and fresh perspective." "I've only been with the company 6 months," I pointed out. "And in that time, you've launched 2 successful initiatives, restructured our innovation pipeline, and helped stabilize a family transition that could have destroyed the company." He shrugged. "Just something to consider." As Thornfield departed, I sat momentarily stunned. CEO of Walsh Financial Holdings had never been my ambition or intention. I had simply been trying to honor Mitchell's faith in me while finding my own place in a world thrust upon me by tragedy. Yet as I looked around the ballroom at the company Mitchell had loved, the people whose livelihoods depended on its success, the clients who trusted it with their financial security, the legacy that stretched back generations, I felt a sense of possibility I hadn't anticipated. Not obligation or ambition, but purpose. Later that evening, as the event wound down, I found myself standing near the massive windows overlooking Boston Harbor. The city lights reflected on the dark water, creating patterns of brightness against the night. Eleonora approached, champagne flute in hand. "Successful evening," she observed. "Your presentation was well received." "Thank you," I replied. The national approval came through for the middle-income platform. "Mitchell would be pleased," she said, then added with uncharacteristic openness, "He always saw possibilities others missed. It appears he saw something significant in you as well." I turned to face her directly. "Thornfield mentioned I'm being considered as a CEO candidate." If she was surprised, she didn't show it. "And what do you think about that?" 6 months ago, it would have seemed impossible, I acknowledged. Now, I'm not sure. Eleonora sipped her champagne thoughtfully. "When my husband died, I was offered a board seat at his favorite charity. A courtesy, they thought, for the widow. I declined because I believed I wasn't qualified." Her voice carried a hint of regret. "I've often wondered what might have happened if I'd accepted." The admission of vulnerability from this formidable woman struck me deeply. "It's not too late," I said. "You have tremendous expertise and perspective." At 72, perhaps not for charity boards. She turned to face the harbor view. "But it's not too late for you, Catherine. Mitchell saw your potential. Now others are seeing it too. The question is whether you see it in yourself." Her words resonated with something Mitchell had told me early in our relationship. "The greatest limitation isn't what others believe about you. It's what you believe about yourself." As the evening concluded and guests began departing, I found myself back on the ballroom stage, now empty except for a few staff clearing glasses and plates. 6 months ago, I had stood at the back of a funeral parlor, clutching Mitchell's letter while his family laughed dismissively. Today, I stood before a room that had applauded my vision and leadership. The journey from invisible to essential hadn't been driven by revenge or even ambition, but by the simple, powerful choice to believe in my own capabilities. Mitchell had given me that gift, not just financial security or company shares, but the recognition of strength I hadn't seen in myself. As I gathered my things to leave, Andrea approached with my coat. "Congratulations on the national approval," she said warmly. "Mitchell would be so proud of what you've accomplished." "Thank you, Andrea." I slipped on my coat, feeling its weight settle on my shoulders like the responsibility I had grown into. "Would you do me a favor? Could you clear my calendar tomorrow?" "Morning? I think I need some time to consider an important decision." She nodded knowingly. "The CEO position?" "Yes," I admitted. "It's not something I ever expected to consider." "If I may," she said with uncharacteristic directness, "Mitchell once told me that the best leaders aren't those who seek power, but those who recognize when they're uniquely positioned to make a difference." Her words stayed with me as I drove home through the quiet Boston streets. The house Mitchell and I had shared, once filled with grief and uncertainty, had transformed alongside me. New art hung on the walls, reflecting my emerging tastes. His books remained, but now sat alongside volumes on finance, leadership, and corporate strategy that marked my own journey. In our bedroom, I opened the small jewelry box where I kept Mitchell's letter, the one that had started everything, at the funeral. The paper had softened with repeated handling, the creases deepening into permanent lines. I no longer needed to read the words. They had become part of me. Tomorrow, I would consider the CEO opportunity with the careful thought it deserved. I would weigh my readiness against the company's needs, confer with advisors I trusted, and make a decision based on purpose rather than pride. But tonight, I simply stood at our bedroom window, looking out at the city where I had transformed from Mitchell's invisible widow to a leader in my own right. They had laughed at me at my husband's funeral, dismissing me as irrelevant to the Walsh legacy. Now, that legacy might soon rest in my hands, not because I had fought for it, but because I had proven myself worthy of it. Mitchell had seen my potential before I recognized it myself. His final gift hadn't been shares or wealth or position. It had been the opportunity to discover my own capacity for growth, leadership, and resilience. In losing him, I had found myself. And that, perhaps, was the greatest legacy of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.